What if I told you that a mysterious group of Bronze Age horsemen from the Eurasian Steppe might be the reason behind the languages we speak today, the way we live, and even the shape of our DNA? Sounds like the plot of a science fiction movie, right? But it's not. It's a real story, one that scientists are still uncovering piece by piece, thanks to ancient DNA. Meet the Yamnaya. You may have never heard of them, but this ancient nomadic culture that thrived over 5,000 years ago is quietly becoming one of the most important chapters in human history. They didn't leave behind towering pyramids or golden temples. What they did leave, however, is written in our genetic code. For decades, archaeologists debated who brought the Indo-European languages into Europe and South Asia, the linguistic roots of English, Hindi, Latin, Greek, and dozens more. The answer remained elusive, wrapped in conflicting theories and fragmented artifacts. But then came the genetic revolution. And suddenly, the Yamnaya weren't just a footnote in the story of civilization. They were the central characters. In this video, we'll dig into the latest revelations from genetic science that are rewriting everything we thought we knew about the Yamnaya people. From unexpected ancestral origins in the Caucasus to their role in shaping modern populations across 2 continents, the discoveries are as surprising as they are profound. So buckle up, because this isn't just a history lesson. It's a journey back in time to meet the ancestors you never knew you had. The Yamnaya weren't just riders of the steppe. They were the great transformers of the ancient world. To truly understand why the Yamnaya are so crucial to our human story, we first need to ask, who are they really? Long before the rise of great cities or empires, before the written word had even taken root across most of the world, the Yamnaya were thriving on the vast grasslands that stretch from modern-day Ukraine through southern Russia and into western Kazakhstan. This massive expanse of land, known as the Pontic-Caspian steppe, was their home, a wide, open frontier perfect for mobility, herding, and eventually expansion. The Yamnaya people lived during the early Bronze Age, around 3300 to 2600 BCE. They were semi-nomadic pastoralists, meaning they raised animals like cattle, sheep, and horses and moved with the seasons to find fresh pastures. Unlike other ancient cultures that built monumental architecture or left behind elaborate cities, the Yamnaya left simpler clues: burial mounds known as kurgans, tools, pottery, and, perhaps most crucially, their DNA. Archaeologically, they're known for their unique burial practices. Yamnaya individuals were often interred in pit graves beneath kurgans, laid on their backs with bent legs, sometimes accompanied by animal bones or simple goods. These burials have provided a rich source of ancient DNA, and in recent years, that genetic material has completely transformed what we thought we knew about their role in human history. Culturally, the Yamnaya were advanced in ways that helped set them apart. They likely spoke an early form of Proto-Indo-European, the ancestral language from which many modern languages, like English, Spanish, Hindi, Persian, and Russian, eventually evolved. Their ability to domesticate and ride horses gave them unmatched mobility. And they didn't just use wagons. They were some of the first to truly master the concept of long-distance migration using wheel transport. But what really makes them stand out today is their sudden and massive genetic impact across Eurasia. Around 3000 BCE, something changed. The Yamnaya began to move fast and far. In just a few centuries, they expanded westward into Europe and eastward into Central Asia. This wasn't a small migration. It was a demographic transformation. Recent genetic studies have shown that modern Europeans, especially those in Northern and Eastern Europe, carry a significant portion of Yamnaya ancestry. In some regions, up to 75% of the male genetic lineages can be traced back to them. That's staggering for a people many had never heard of until recently. So, who were the Yamnaya? They were more than just herders of the steppe. They were innovators, travelers, and carriers of a cultural and genetic legacy that spans continents. They set the stage for massive shifts in language, technology, and population. And thanks to science, we're only now beginning to grasp the scale of their impact. The Yamnaya people didn't build towering temples or leave behind grand cities, but what they did create was just as powerful, a way of life so dynamic, It reshaped half the ancient world. Living across the vast Eurasian steppe between 3300 and 2600 BCE, the Yamnaya developed a culture rooted in movement, resourcefulness, and adaptability. Let's start with their homes, or rather, their constant state of movement. As pastoral nomads, the Yamnaya followed their herds, moving seasonally across the open plains. Their main livestock included cattle, sheep, and goats, but the real game changer was the horse. While they weren't the first to domesticate horses, they were among the earliest to master riding. This single skill gave them an almost superhuman level of mobility for their time. They could travel long distances, scout new territory, and herd animals with far greater ease than other groups stuck on foot. Their wagons were another key innovation. Pulled by oxen and sometimes horses, these heavy-duty wooden carts weren't just for carrying goods. They were portable homes, storage units, and status symbols all in one. Some Yamnaya burial sites even include remnants of wagons placed beside the dead, a symbol of the role these vehicles played in daily life. The Yamnaya diet was practical and protein-heavy. They consumed a lot of meat and dairy from their herds, supplemented with some grains and wild plants. Interestingly, genetic research shows they were among the first populations to have a high frequency of genes related to lactose tolerance, the ability to digest milk into adulthood. This trait would later spread across Europe with their migration, becoming a defining genetic marker. In terms of social structure, the Yamnaya seemed to operate with clear hierarchies. The elaborate burial mounds, or kurgans, suggest that certain individuals, likely leaders or warriors, were treated with great reverence. Many were buried with personal items, such as weapons, ornaments, and even sacrificed animals. These weren't just graves, they were cultural statements, communicating status, beliefs, and identity. Religion and spirituality are harder to pin down, as the Yamnaya left no written records. However, the consistent burial customs and grave goods point to a shared belief system, possibly involving ancestor worship or early forms of Indo-European mythology. Fire rituals, the positioning of bodies, and animal sacrifices all hint at a spiritual connection between the living, the dead, and the natural world. One more key piece: gender roles. Archaeological evidence suggests that men and women had distinct but complementary roles in society. Men were often buried with weapons, while women were sometimes found with ornaments and tools related to domestic life or textile work. This division of labor may reflect how the community functioned as a whole, with everyone playing a part in survival and mobility. In essence, the Yamnaya lifestyle was built around movement, resilience, and strong community ties. They didn't need permanent cities to thrive. Their culture was a living system, carried across the steppe in wagons, preserved in ritual, and passed on through generations. And as we'll soon see, this way of life laid the foundation for some of the most profound cultural shifts in ancient Europe and Asia. For decades, the origins of Indo-European languages and the spread of certain cultural traits across Europe and South Asia were shrouded in mystery. Archaeologists had theories, linguists drew maps, but the puzzle pieces never fully locked into place until genetics entered the scene. In the last 2 decades, ancient DNA has done what decades of debate couldn't: reveal the true power and legacy of the Yamnaya people. The big breakthrough came from sequencing the genomes of ancient skeletons recovered from burial sites across the Eurasian steppe. When scientists compared these with DNA from Neolithic European farmers and hunter-gatherers, a third source of ancestry emerged, completely distinct and overwhelmingly influential. This new player was labeled steppe ancestry, and it was traced directly to the Yamnaya. What made this so shocking wasn't just the existence of this genetic layer, it was how widespread and dominant it became. Around 5,000 years ago, as the Yamnaya began expanding westward and southward, their DNA didn't just trickle into other populations. It surged. In Central and Northern Europe, for instance, populations that were once made up almost entirely of early farmers suddenly showed a massive genetic shift. In some areas, up to 75% of the gene pool was replaced within just a few centuries. This wasn't a subtle blending, it was a transformation. And it didn't stop at Europe. Genetic traces of the Yamnaya have been found all the way in South Asia, especially among groups that speak Indo-European languages like Hindi, Bengali, and Persian. This link provided genetic confirmation of what linguistic models had long suggested. The spread of Indo-European languages was deeply tied to the movement of people from the steppe. One of the most intriguing discoveries was that the Yamnaya didn't move alone. Their genetic signature often shows up alongside cultural elements like burial mounds, specific pottery styles, and, most importantly, horse-based mobility. This correlation suggested that the spread of their genes and their way of life went hand in hand. Even more fascinating was the role of Y chromosomes, markers passed down through the male line. In many regions, the Y chromosomal haplogroup, R1b, strongly associated with the Yamnaya, suddenly became dominant. This shift implies that the male members of the Yamnaya expansions played a particularly strong role in population turnover, a pattern often seen in patrilineal, mobile warrior societies. Scientists were also able to reconstruct the timing of these movements. Using radiocarbon dating alongside genetic data, researchers placed the major wave of steppe ancestry entering Europe around 3000 BCE. This timeline aligns perfectly with the collapse of older Neolithic cultures and the rise of new Bronze Age societies, including the corded ware and bell beaker cultures, both of which carry strong genetic ties to the Yamnaya. Ultimately, the genetic evidence doesn't just prove that the Yamnaya were influential. It shows they were transformational. Their DNA spread across continents, their cultural practices reshaped the way people lived, and their legacy continues to echo in the genes of millions today. Perhaps one of the most fascinating mysteries in history has been the origin of the Indo-European languages, a language family that includes English, Hindi, Russian, Spanish, Greek, Persian, and dozens more. These languages are spoken today by nearly half the world's population. But how did such a wide-ranging family of languages come into existence? And more importantly, where did it all begin? For years, linguists have compared these languages and found undeniable similarities in grammar, structure, and even vocabulary. For example, the word for mother is mater in Latin, mater in Persian, matka in Polish, and ma in Hindi. Coincidence? Not likely. The similarities suggested a common origin, a so-called Proto-Indo-European language that once gave birth to all these modern tongues. But where was this mysterious language spoken? There were competing theories. Some scholars thought it began in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Others believed it started near the Caucasus. But with the discovery of ancient Yamnaya DNA and the genetic steppe ancestry explosion, the picture started to come into focus, and the spotlight shifted to the Eurasian steppes. Genetic research linked the Yamnaya people directly to the spread of Indo-European languages. As they migrated west into Europe and east into South Asia, they didn't just bring their genes, they brought their words. In fact, these migrations neatly align with the appearance of Indo-European languages in those regions. It's not just about DNA anymore. Language patterns, archaeological evidence, and now genetic timelines are all telling the same story. In Europe, the Yamnaya mixed with local Neolithic farmers and gave rise to the corded ware culture. This group is widely believed to be the linguistic ancestor of many Indo-European languages, from Germanic and Slavic to Celtic and Italic. Meanwhile, other Yamnaya-related groups expanded southeast into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. These later migrants are believed to have introduced early forms of Sanskrit and Indo-Aryan languages into the region. What makes this discovery powerful is that it's no longer just academic theory. It's grounded in real science. Ancient DNA studies have shown a clear influx of steppe ancestry in both Europe and India around 2000 to 1500 BCE. This timeline aligns almost perfectly with the estimated spread of Indo-European languages. It's a rare moment when genetics, archaeology, and linguistics all converge to tell one coherent story. And here's something even more fascinating. Despite the vast distances and cultural differences, echoes of that original language are still alive today. Whether you say three, as trace in Spanish, trois in French, or teen in Hindi, you're speaking the linguistic legacy of the Yamnaya. In the end, this Indo-European connection is not just about words. It's about people, ancient nomads who carried not only their livestock and wagons across the plains, but also the seeds of a language tree that would branch out across the world. The Yamnaya may have vanished thousands of years ago, but the way we speak today is still shaped by their ancient voice. When the Yamnaya people began their migrations into Europe around 3000 BCE, they weren't entering empty lands. The continent was already home to thriving Neolithic farming communities who had been cultivating the land, building megalithic structures, and developing intricate social systems for thousands of years. These early Europeans, often called Old Europeans by archaeologists, had a rich cultural identity rooted in agriculture, goddess worship, and communal village life. But when the Yamnaya arrived from the steppes, the world of these Neolithic peoples was about to undergo a dramatic transformation. The first encounters were likely not peaceful. Archaeological evidence from around this period shows signs of sudden cultural disruption, mass graves, burned villages, and a noticeable decline in the population of some Neolithic settlements. In Central Europe, many archaeologists have uncovered burial sites that reflect this clash. Older farming cultures buried communally, while Yamnaya-related groups introduced single graves under mounds, often with weapons and other personal items, signs of a shift in both beliefs and social structure. But this wasn't just a story of conquest. Over time, a complex process of assimilation took place. Genetic studies show that rather than wiping out the old Europeans, the Yamnaya mixed with them. The result was a new hybrid population, genetically part steppe nomad and part Neolithic farmer, that would go on to shape the future of Europe. This genetic blending gave rise to cultures like the corded ware and bell beaker, which inherited elements from both ancestors. From the Yamnaya came mobility, horse culture, and possibly a patriarchal warrior ethos. From the Neolithic farmers came knowledge of agriculture, settled village life, and perhaps more egalitarian social customs. The fusion of these very different worlds sparked a cultural evolution that would ripple through time. Language likely played a role in this assimilation. As the Yamnaya and their descendants settled among farming communities, their Proto-Indo-European tongue may have become the dominant language, gradually replacing local dialects. But the process wasn't instant. It likely took generations, with each new cohort blending more of the steppe and farming worlds into something entirely new. Interestingly, the Yamnaya themselves also adapted. As they moved into forested regions and agricultural zones, their purely nomadic lifestyle evolved. They learned from the Neolithic peoples how to farm, build permanent homes, and adopt new technologies. What started as a dramatic collision eventually turned into mutual exchange. And that's the beauty of history. It's rarely black and white. The story of the Yamnaya and the Old Europeans is not just one of war or dominance. It's also one of synthesis, resilience, and adaptation. The Europe that emerged from this merger was stronger, more diverse, and culturally richer than either group on their own. Today, every person in Europe carries the legacy of this ancient meeting, in their DNA, their languages, and the cultures that still echo both the farmers and the horse-riding warriors from the distant steppes. For a group that lived over 5,000 years ago, the Yamnaya left behind something far more lasting than artifacts or ruins. They left their signature in our DNA. Thanks to recent advances in ancient genomics, scientists have been able to decode just how deeply the Yamnaya impacted modern human populations. And the results? Absolutely astonishing. When researchers began analyzing ancient skeletons from across Europe and Asia, they noticed something unusual. A strikingly consistent pattern of genetic markers that traced back to the Eurasian steppes, the Yamnaya homeland. These markers were especially prominent in people from Central and Northern Europe, but also detectable in parts of South Asia and the Middle East. In fact, for many modern Europeans, up to 50% of their ancestry can be traced directly to the Yamnaya. That's an enormous contribution from a group that migrated over a relatively short period. Take, for example, the people of Britain. Before the arrival of the bell beaker culture, heavily influenced by Yamnaya ancestry, Britain was home to Neolithic farmers with Mediterranean roots. But by the time the Bronze Age rolled in, Yamnaya-related genes had largely replaced the older population. The same pattern occurred across Germany, Scandinavia, and even into the Iberian Peninsula. This wasn't just cultural takeover. It was biological transformation on a continental scale. But the Yamnaya legacy doesn't stop in Europe. Traces of their genetic profile have also been found in South Asian populations. This connection lines up with the theory of Indo-European migration into the Indian subcontinent, a theory once debated but now strongly supported by DNA evidence. Around 2000 BCE, steppe ancestry began appearing in northern India, likely carried by nomadic groups descending from the Yamnaya or their relatives. These people contributed to both the gene pool and the linguistic evolution of a region. It's not just about where their genes show up, but what traits they may have passed on. Some studies suggest that the Yamnaya brought alleles associated with height, light skin pigmentation, and certain immune responses. They also likely influenced the spread of lactose tolerance, the ability to digest milk into adulthood, which became more common in Europe after their arrival. What makes the Yamnaya's genetic legacy so profound is how widespread and enduring it is. Their DNA isn't buried in some obscure corner of a single genome. It's in millions of people across continents, living echoes of a mobile, ambitious people who once rode across the open grasslands on horseback, carrying their culture and genes with them. Their story, once thought to be lost to time, is now being uncovered not by digging into the ground alone, but by digging into our cells. With each new genetic study, we learn that we're not just descended from kings, farmers, or warriors, but from a remarkable fusion of all three, with the Yamnaya playing a central role in shaping who many of us are today. For decades, the story of how ancient humans spread across Europe and Asia relied mostly on archaeology, pottery shards, burial mounds, and tools were the breadcrumbs we followed through time. But with the rise of genetic science, the narrative has changed dramatically. Now DNA is revealing that one of the most important forces behind prehistoric migrations was a group called the Yamnaya. And thanks to their genes, we're rewriting entire chapters of human history. Before DNA came into the picture, many scholars believed that population changes in prehistory were mostly slow and gradual. Cultures were thought to have spread through contact and trade, not through large-scale movements of people. But the genetic fingerprint of Yamnaya tells a different story, one of massive, rapid migration that reshaped the genetic landscape of much of Eurasia. What we now know is that around 3300 BCE, the Yamnaya began a swift and wide-reaching expansion from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. Within just a few centuries, their descendants had pushed westward into Europe and eastward towards Central Asia, and even parts of South Asia. This wasn't just a cultural ripple, it was a genetic wave. Whole regions saw significant population turnover, with Yamnaya ancestry quickly rising to prominence in the gene pool. This discovery has forced archaeologists and historians to reconsider long-held beliefs. For example, in places like Central Europe, the arrival of the corded, where culture was once seen as a local evolution. But DNA proves it was driven largely by migration from the steppe. The same goes for the Indo-Iranian expansion, once a mystery, now better understood thanks to the Yamnaya's eastern branch. What makes the Yamnaya migration so important isn't just how far they traveled, but how fundamentally they transformed the populations they encountered. Their movement wasn't isolated. It was followed by generations of blending, assimilation, and reshaping of societies. It led to the rise of new cultures, new languages, and entirely new genetic identities. The influence of the Yamnaya even helps explain the spread of the Proto-Indo-European language family, one of the largest and most widespread in the world. Linguists and geneticists now work hand in hand, using ancient DNA to map the journey of both people and language from the steppe across continents. This new understanding has also brought attention to the complexity of prehistoric identity. The Yamnaya were not a monolithic people, and their interactions with others were varied. In some places they dominated, in others they blended. The past wasn't a single migration or one big conquest. It was layered, nuanced, and dynamic. In many ways, the study of Yamnaya DNA has cracked open a window into a past we never thought we'd see so clearly. It's not just about where people came from, but how migration, intermarriage, and adaptation shaped the very foundations of modern populations. So as scientists continue to sequence ancient genomes, each discovery reminds us the prehistoric world was far more connected and far more mobile than we ever imagined. And at the heart of that story stands the Yamnaya, galloping across the steppes and into the pages of our deepest history.